Hello, welcome. We are talking politics and religion without killing each other. I am your host, Corey Nathan. It is an honor to be a part of the Democracy Group. That's a network of podcasts that examines what's broken in our democracy and how we can work together to fix it. And right at the top, I just want to point you to our Substack. I've been having so much fun over there, really engaging readers and commenters. And I don't know, don't tell. I think I shared this before. Don't tell Zuck and Elon, but that is definitely emerging as my favorite platform. Yeah, Substack. So it's real easy to find. CoreySNathan.substack.com. CoreyS as in Sam NATHAN.substack.com. Now, let's get right to it. I am so happy to be joined today by David A. Graham. David Graham is a staff writer at The Atlantic and an author of The Atlantic Daily Newsletter. He's the author of The Project, How Project 2025 is Reshaping America, which came out earlier this year. And he has a new piece in The Atlantic, which we'll discuss, titled Donald Trump's Plan to Subvert the Midterms is Already Underway. Thank you so much for joining us, David. Man, you must, between the book and the new piece, it must be a whirlwind. So how are you holding up, man?
It's been a busy year. There's a lot of news, and that's the job. This has been a very busy year, but I feel like they've all been that way for the last 10 years or so.
Yeah.
You get used to it.
Yeah. So I was listening to another interview where you discussed how journalism, writing was something that you were interested in fairly early on, going back to the first Gulf War, if I heard correctly. Is this something that you envisioned going along with the the writing and the reporting?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what I had in mind. I just knew that like the news was always really interesting to me. My mom would have All Things Considered on NPR while she was cooking dinner, and I'd be sitting there playing with alphabet blocks or trucks or whatever. And so it was just part of the sort of ambient environment all around. And my parents were people who followed the news closely, and so I think I just I became really into the idea of knowing what was going on and being aware of it. And when I started doing journalism in college, I found that there was such a thrill to that and a kind of adrenaline. And I think I'm just still kind of hooked on that.
You know, what's interesting, the way that you just put that, my dad was an avid NPR, PBS watcher and listener, respectively. And McNeil Lehrer hour was one that was constantly playing in our house. And doing this for the last 5 years, I've had the opportunity to speak with some of the journalists that have that appeared there, David Brooks and E.J. Dionne, just in the last year or so. I would imagine for you, it's got to be such a thrill. Number one, working at The Atlantic. I mean, a publication that's been around for what, 150. You like one of your pieces was citing a piece that Mark Twain wrote in The Atlantic.
Right.
I mean, that's got to be pretty cool.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I love the history of The Atlantic. We talk about it a lot internally in a really nerdy way. And I start talking about The Atlantic, and I really sound like I'm kind of bought in, but I think it's true. And I think one thing that I like is that we're a publication that has changed, how we reach people and some things about what we do. But there's a real continuity, or we try to keep a continuity with the kind of ideals that the first people writing for the magazine were doing in the 1850s, and we try to be aware of those things. So I do find that really helpful. And I think my fundamental orientation in life is institutionalist. And so like being part of an institution that long and that old really appeals to me.
What do you mean by institutionalist?
I think more than when I think about what I value in my own life and what I tend to gravitate towards in political stories, it is institutions that can stand strongly, things that have a history, that are grounded in that history, a sort of sense of stability, a sense of developing norms, and being very cautious about changing those things. So being open-minded, but fundamentally not being about radical change or about moving fast and breaking things.
Right, right. When I was growing up in the 80s and then as a young man in the 90s, that answer would have sounded like a conservative.
Yes.
It's interesting. So going back to your formative years, I think you went to Duke. Do I
Hmm.
remember that right? Is that where you started writing?
Yeah, I started writing for the college newspaper there pretty much the first week of school, and then I barely left the office for 4 years.
Oh, wow. Did you learn from folks there, or like how did you learn how to write?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the best thing to learn how to write is just reading a lot of good writing, and I
Yeah.
think I was already a little bit in that habit. And there are people who are not necessarily journalists or not journalists in the sense we think of it now, but people whose work I really loved when I was a kid. Twain, Ambrose Bierce, who's from the same part of Ohio I'm from, so he was sort of a hero of mine. James Thurber, also an Ohioan. Um, and then when I got to school, it was both a combination of just getting a lot of reps, writing as many stories as I could, and then getting really good guidance from people. There were editors I had, some of whom have gone into journalism. There's a guy named Steve Veris, who I believe works for NBC now. I should check that. Who was just a great editor and would, in a really avuncular, funny way, be like, take this back and do a better job on this. You do not have it. And deliver it in a way that I was like, yeah, I want to do that. There's a woman named Sarah Ball, who's now the editor of WSJ Magazine, who was like, why are you writing boring when you could write more interesting? Like, just do that. And so having people like that sort of tell me what to do and or like encourage me and be like, we can see there's something here. You need to do more or do more of that, or that's great. I think really, it made it into a community experience too, which was really great. It was, an institution in the same way.
Right, right. So what I'm hearing is it has partly to do with the stories that you were able to pursue or chose to pursue, but also that interaction, whether it was with other writers or I'm guessing editors. Is that
Hmm.
right?
Yeah. It was, all student run organization. So it was, and I had this very snobby attitude about journalism teaching. Like, I'm not going to go take this in a classroom. I'm going to learn it on the job. And my punishment for that is that I now teach journalism at Duke. And I realized I didn't have to choose, and that was the wrong attitude. But I did learn so much from just being around other student journalists, and trying to compete with other people on the paper and get my stories on the front page and get the best stories as well.
I didn't plan on asking you this, but since you bring up the fact that you're a professor, how where are you in terms of the ethics of journalism as it pertains to AI?
Hmm.
So just to be completely transparent, I've been writing a lot more, and the way I've been using AI is kind of like Matt Lewis and I were talking about it, and it's kind of like I use it the way I use the thesaurus,
Hmm.
where I'll do a big, just a rough draft. I'll probably, I don't know, I'll probably do another pass, but then I'll feed it into ChatGPT or some other tool, and then I'll have specific questions like, "Hey, I think this runs on too long," or "Is there a way to like?" So I don't know. I don't know if that's. I may have just outed myself as using AI unethically, but like I'm using it as a specific tool, I guess as an editor with specific questions that I'm asking it to do for me. Is that kind of within the boundaries of ethical writing, or what do you think?
I mean, so I haven't. I'm not teaching this semester, and it feels like things are moving so quickly that the approach I took last time I taught is not necessarily still valid as the things get better. Um, I think it's there are places like that, like going over things that I think make some sense. And I've always told students, look, get your roommate to read this, read it out loud, do these things that will help you find where there's issues of logic or where the sentence just doesn't quite make sense if you read it aloud or somebody else reads it. And in some ways, these bots can fill that function.
Mm,
I worry about people using it as a crutch. Um, I'm kind of a Luddite, but I have found it. I think it's great as a thesaurus. And the other thing that I find is like uh, it's just such a useful search engine because there's so
yeah.
many things where I remember somebody said something, but I can't remember what or where. And I don't know how to ask Google for that. Or like something that my colleague Derek Thompson pointed out to me, which I found really helpful, is okay, I read a study 4 years ago, or I read a political science paper 4 years ago, and I can remember something about it, but like there's no Google search term that's going to come up with that.
Right.
But ChatGPT can find that for me, and that is really helpful.
Yeah, yeah. No, I find that I still have to do the work. So I'll see a reference, but I won't. I won't leave the reference by itself. Like there was a reference to defining deviancy down, that famous
Hmm.
essay that the senator from New York, I'm blanking on
Moynihan.
Moynihan. Thank you, Daniel Patrick Moynihan. But okay, so now I go and read the whole essay.
Right.
You know
Yeah.
what I mean? So one fellow who's really forward thinking when it comes to AI in the creative industry that I work in, he says human in and human out. Just make sure it's
Hmm.
human in and human out, and use it as a tool. Whether it's helping with research. Okay, sorry, I didn't mean to go down that rabbit trail, but thank you for your input. I'm
Yeah.
trying to. I want to make sure that I'm staying within ethical boundaries.
Hmm.
I guess there's a line somewhere. It's like, hey, write me 5 paragraphs on, that wouldn't be useful. And I hope that's not where we end up going. So I want to talk a little bit about the project. The first question I had was, I haven't heard anybody ask you this. Who were Karen Blumenthal and John F. Burness?
Oh, so those are actually two people I know from school too. Karen was a Duke alum and who'd been editor of the Duke student paper in the early '80s, and the paper had a board of directors made up mostly of alumni, and she was on that board and was just a really important mentor for me who would help me. She would like walk me through a lot of really important reporting stuff. She was a financial journalist, so she would like walk me how to look at a university's financial disclosure, which is meant to be very opaque, and find interesting things in there, and just really push people to report really well. It helped me out in a lot in my career with a lot of advice. And just a really important mentor to me. And she died in 2020.
Mm.
And then John Burness was, and this is a weird thing, he was the head of public relations at Duke when I was a student. And usually you have a pretty adversarial relationship with that kind of person. But he was someone who I just thought was, he cared so much about teaching, and he cared so much about the role of the free press. And he took the idea that we were students. He wanted to both teach us and also treat us as though we were real reporters, and I thought he did a great job of doing that, um, and just set an admirable example. And so there were two people. As I was writing the book, I thought about people who were interested in politics, interested in getting to the bottom of things, interested in good and clear journalism. And John died in 2022, I believe. So they were both still on my mind when I was writing.
Right, right. How long did it take you? Well, first of all, how long did it take you to read through the whole Project 2025?
Um, so I had read bits and pieces of it, basically on a subject matter basis during the campaign, but I didn't sit down to read the whole thing until after the election. And so I started on this project basically on December 1st,
Mm.
having not, and I started reading cover to cover on December 1st. And the book was turned in, the first draft I turned in on January 15th.
It's really so. Your book, by the way, is really well sourced. I mean, obviously, just having read those 900 or 1,000 pages is a lot of work to do by itself. But it's really so. We're sitting here at almost exactly a year since the election. How much of what was documented in Project 2025 has already been implemented by this administration, or what's perhaps maybe not fully implemented but set in motion?
Right. I mean, I think the most important part of Project 2025, the thing that undergirds all of its, subsidiary work, is to really, make this very vast vision of presidential power real. To take power from Congress, to assert power over independent regulatory agencies, to do to make the Justice Department answer directly to the White House. All of these things that give the president more power and allow the policy things later on to go. And I think that has been incredibly successful. And we see examples of that all over the place, almost every day. The policy stuff that flows from that is a mixed bag. Closing the education department is not finished, but it's a work in progress that I think they've done a lot on. And you see a lot of individual spots, particular policies where they've made headway. There are other places where they haven't done as much. And so, I've tried to think about how to quantify that, and I think it's hard to do. But I would say that, on the executive power thing, the grade is mostly complete. And on a lot of the stuff beyond that, it's kind of incomplete or still in progress.
So one of the things that you said is the way you put it, Project 2025 seeks to reinvent not just what the government does, but the more basic questions of how. So how do you think the Trump administration is already doing this? Some other examples?
So, I mean, I think one thing we can look at is spending and Congress.
Mm.
And I think that's kind of relevant now where we have, Congress is literally not funding the government as we speak since we're in the middle of a shutdown.
Yeah.
And one reason that it feels like the shutdown is going on for so long, I think, is that Congress was already not doing that much.
Yeah.
And this is something that the authors they recognize that Congress has become really sclerotic, and decided they could sort of just seize powers from Congress. And we see the administration saying that they don't have to spend money that Congress has appropriated, making a lot of decisions about funding, moving funding around, taking funding from tariffs to pay for other things, even though it hasn't been appropriated. So there's this just sense that the power of the purse doesn't need to belong to Congress anymore, and the executive branch can act as it wants. And even when there are laws that constrain it, like the Impoundment Control Act of 1974, Russell Vought, the head of the Office of Management and Budget, has said repeatedly, as have some of his close allies, that they believe this law is unconstitutional. And so even if they understand they may be in a position to break the law, but they think the Supreme Court will back them up if they can get a case there. So that's one area. The other thing that I think is maybe the most glaring area is the way the president interacts with executive branch agencies. So one is the Department of Justice, which is weird in that the Attorney General is appointed by the president and is a political appointee, but DOJ has worked as a more or less somewhat insulated from politics agency, with some notable counterexamples in history. And DOJ is now working very closely with Trump. Trump is sort of offering direct directions. We see political influence. Just this week, a couple of prosecutors were suspended for referring to people involved in January 6th as rioters. So that's an example of where the politicization is reaching into DOJ. And then if you look at independent regulatory agencies like, I don't know, the Federal Election Commission or the Federal Communications Commission or any of those sort of alphabet soup agencies, those are too a place where traditionally the president appoints the commissioners or the chairman or whatever the structure is. Those people are confirmed by Congress. And then the agency basically acts on its own. And often the people who are appointees are going to have similar politics to the president, but the president can't, remove them at will, for example. And that's another place where the administration believes that the laws that set that up are unconstitutional. They want to challenge them. And that allows them to treat all of those agencies as kind of parts of their political operation. And so when we see, for example, the FCC, pushing CBS Paramount or pushing ABC, there's that control. And there is the connection between the White House and the agencies in action.
Yeah. So one of the challenges that I have in everyday conversations, to the characters that emerged in the book are Paul Dance. You already mentioned one, Russell Vought. Is that how you said it?
Vought, yeah.
How do I guess first of all, if you could tell folks a little bit more about who they are, but more specifically, why that's important. So, I was having a conversation with one of my relatives actually just yesterday, and the basic premise of that person's position was, well, why does it matter? I mean, how does it affect my day-to-day life? This guy, if I explained office management and budget or whatever, like, so how does that change why is that important, basically?
Right. I think that people should think about the ways they interact with the government. So, you get Social Security at some age. You pay into Social Security in any case. Maybe you're receiving healthcare through the government. If you have children, you're sending them to schools. Those schools are probably receiving federal money if they're in public schools. If you go to a doctor and you are prescribed medicine, those medicines have to be approved by the FDA. If you are a person who gets sick, then the public health apparatus in the country generally matters to you. And I think what all of these things are doing is putting control over all of these apparatuses more in the person of the president and in the people around him, without any safeguards. So I think the question is, like, do you want one person who might not be in the party you agree with to have that kind of power? And I think that's a question that is, if you're talking to somebody left of center, it's really easy to see, for them to see why that's a problem. But if you're talking to somebody right of center, I think the same question applies. Do you want a Democrat to have the same kind of unfettered power that Trump is exerting over the executive branch? And, the traditional conservative answer has been absolutely not. Conservatives have tended to push back against presidential power, and they have thought it's important that there be a check on those things. And I think we see a real shift in some of these people in Project 2025. The two folks you mentioned, one is Paul Dans, and I think it's interesting, Paul Dans and Russell Vought, and they're kind of two different sides of the MAGA coalition, if you will. Paul Dans is this guy who, came from, as he describes it, a sort of like Kennedy Democrat family, got involved in the Federalist Society in law school, worked in law firms, and then worked in the first Trump administration. And he's always had this kind of outsider chip on his shoulder. And in the administration, got really angry at what he thought were political appointees, as well as civil service appointees who he just thought weren't trying to get things done, or weren't there to help Trump, or were trying to sort of sandbag Trump. Whether it was because they were liberals or because they were the wrong kind of conservatives. And he's kind of the person who organized a lot of Project 2025. And then Russell Vought he's by comparison a real insider.
Yeah.
So he spent a ton of time on Capitol Hill, in major conservative think tanks. He looks and talks like a really sort of, restrained wonk. But he knows deeply how government works. And he just described himself as a Christian nationalist. And so he's the sort of the inside man who is the architect intellectually of how do you seize control of the executive branch? How do you make the executive branch work to do the things that we want to do? And I think he's been really adept at that in these last 9 or 10 months.
So the way that you put it, when it comes to Russell Vought, Project 2025 solution is paradoxical. The authors want to shift even more power to the president. Vought tries to square this circle by calling for aggressive use of the vast powers of the executive branch to return power, including power currently held by the executive branch, to the American people. But that doesn't square. I mean, your newest story today kind of outlines some very viable possibilities of next week's elections, let alone 2026 and
Right.
2028, by disrupting the electoral system. So I don't know. Is that a sales pitch? Do you think they're buying their own bullshit?
I mean, I don't know. I think that's exactly the right question, and I think it's hard to say. And I mean, I think when something that people have asked is, well, what do they think is going to happen when a Democrat is the president? And one answer is maybe they don't think a Democrat will be the president again, and I don't think that's true. These are people who've been around politics. I do think that their constitutional critiques are coherent. They argue that, for example, having these independent regulatory agencies that are in the executive branch but don't answer to the president, they say that doesn't make any sense. That's not how the framers designed it, and it shouldn't be constitutional. And I think that's both coherent and also, for obvious reasons, raises concerns about how much power the executive branch has. And Congress clearly didn't want that power to sit with the president. They wrote the laws that way. So if it's not constitutional, it seems to me we should find a different way to do it, not concentrate all of the power in the White House. And because, the Constitution is, I don't know. I mean, we are now in a position, in the last few days, we've heard people talking about a third term for Trump and sort of openly questioning whether the Constitution can block something like that. But if we believe in the Constitution, it is set up to have checks and balances. And I think what worries me most about Project 2025, from a structural, there's policy ideas that I think are good, policy ideas I think are bad, policy ideas that I don't have much opinion on because there's only so many things I can understand. But I think the undermining of checks and balances is the thing that worries me most, and the thing that I think is important for people to understand, regardless of their political orientation.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I mean, just even the most I'm not a lawyer. I didn't take any law classes or whatever, but even the most basic reading of the Constitution, it's kind of like Article 2 is saying, yeah, that whole Article 1 thing is cute, but we're going to do what we're going to do anyway.
Right.
And we're seeing it. I mean, we're seeing it almost on a daily basis. And I mean, once you get to the Bill of Rights, the First Amendment, there are concrete material ways that every one of those freedoms articulated in the First Amendment has been threatened and there's an imbalance there. I'd love to dive a little bit into this new piece as we record this. I think it came out today or yesterday, but it's going to be in the magazine in December. So we're getting a little bit of a preview. Really in depth. So you set up the piece by laying out, like I said, a completely viable scenario Can you set the scene for us? We're in the evening hours of November 3rd, 2026, and you're telling what's happening.
So I think the first thing that I would expect, we'll see, someone just this depends on how the election comes down, but I think I can guess it's going to be a close election for the House, no matter what happens. And I think we can guess that there will be attempts to mess with that. So I imagine Trump will declare victory on election night, no matter where the results are. We saw him do that in 2020 when the results didn't look that great. I think we can imagine we'll see something like that again. And so, in my imagined scenario, not only does Trump declare victory, but quickly there are efforts to stop counting by Republican lawyers. The Justice Department starts threatening Arizona. I'm imagining Arizona as a good place to where there might be tension, because Arizona is a place where you have swing districts, where you have a Democratic governor and Secretary of State, but also a strong Republican, you know, electorate and some swing districts. Then you can imagine the Justice Department coming in, the FBI saying there's fraud, saying they're going to deploy on the ground. Even so, as votes are tallied, Democrats start to pull ahead, which is a well-known effect we've seen called the blue shift or the red mirage. But one lesson we see from 2020 is Trump is unlikely to stop there. He'll keep pressuring. He'll maybe try to call local officials. He will try whatever he can to push people to declare the election over and to make sure the Republicans are the winners. Even up to, I think, the possibility of deploying the armed forces in the streets, something we have seen in other contexts, in cities across the country. This can go a lot of ways. Where I imagine ending with Republican candidates being seated in the House when it's not clear they've won, that giving Republicans control of the House and the election looking very much like a conflicted and maybe illegitimate election for House.
And we're seeing that right now. There's a test case with one of the representatives that was elected in a special election in Arizona, actually.
That's right.
I didn't think of this, but I read another one of your pieces about actually a couple of weeks ago now. That No Kings gave you reason to be hopeful. The number of people that showed up all over the country in particular, and then I'm combining that with one of the reasons that you're not as pessimistic is that we essentially have 50 separate elections. So I'm wondering if you're seeing the enthusiasm and the very illustration of what peaceable assembly looks like on a mass scale, combined with the fact that we have 50 separate elections. Does that give you, I don't know. I'm just looking for a reason to be hopeful, I guess.
I mean, I think that generally people being out and making their voices heard is a good sign.
Yeah.
Anybody who wants to seek power through illegitimate means has to reckon with the fact that there are a lot of people and they are out there. And I think the kind of reaction the Trump administration has given to No Kings shows that they're bothered by that, but they're paying attention.
Yeah.
I do think that, the dispersion of the American election system is something. I get emails from people in other countries when I write about the election system, and they're just flabbergasted by the way it works. A lot of parts of it, but in particular, they're like, wait a second, things are run on the county level and the state level. You have no federal election organization. I think there's a really plausible case to be made that a national election system is better. There's good historical reasons why we don't have one, but I think in this case, the diffusion of the system is a strength
Yeah.
because you can only do so much. And so something that some sources told me is, you're looking at a House of Representatives election. If it's 3 to 5 seats difference, then it's possible that somebody could really mess with an election like that. If there are 10 seats or 15 seats margin, it's just hard to do anything with that many races. You can't concentrate your firepower that much. You can't warp that many races. So I think a lot of it does come down to what the specifics of the House election look like next year.
Yeah. Now, for those of us who really are concerned about the integrity of the elections in 2026 and beyond, what other reasons are there to have confidence that they'll withstand the strain? Because, I mean, you pointed it out, but Trump's allies are now running the government. Pam Bondi in DOJ, Kash Patel in the FBI, Kristi Noem at the DHS. Are there what other reasons, I should say, do we have to be hopeful that the institutions will withstand the strain that figures like that will put on the system.
I think, the thing that gives me most faith is when I talk to local elections officials. Um, and some of these people are, nonpartisan civil servants. Sometimes they're elected officials in either party. And there's some of my favorite people to talk to. They're really practical. They're not easily rattled. They have a job to do and they get it done. They find creative ways to make systems that are often old or failing work. And they care a great deal about it. I mean, they're not in it for glory. They're not in it for money. Um, they're not in it for political advancement. They're there because they care about democracy. And these are the people who oversee the elections. And I think, by and large, those people are a credit to the United States. There are people, we know from the past record that there are people who occasionally do, commit fraud. And usually it's election administrators, not voters. But there's occasionally fraud by election administrators. I think there's genuine concern about people who were election deniers in 2020 and now are in these positions. But I think, by and large, election workers are something that gives me great faith. I think that the people who would seek to undermine elections have learned things. They know more than they did 5 years ago. But the people who are trying to defend elections also know more than they did, and they're more prepared. Things are not going to take them by surprise in the same way they might have in past cycles. And I think, one reason I thought this story was important to tell is to make sure that people are paying attention. I think it's hard to steal an election out from under people's noses. And so if people are paying attention, it makes it more likely the election will be free and fair.
Yeah. Now you live in a purple state. You live in North Carolina, right?
I do, yeah.
So I would consider that a purple state, although depending on how you're looking at it, could be red leaning. But certain areas, I would imagine.
That's right.
Durham.
It's a redder shade of purple, but that's right. Yeah, Durham is fairly blue. Yeah.
Do you have friends or acquaintances that are wearing the MAGA hats, or at least still identify with today's Republican Party? And if so, how do those conversations go? When it comes to this stuff, when it comes to the integrity of our elections?
Yeah, I mean, I think I probably have more Trump supporting friends. I'm from Akron, Ohio originally. Either Trump supporting friends in Ohio or family members than in Durham, which can be you don't have to go very far from Durham to get into pretty red areas, but Durham itself is, I would say, quite blue. It's really interesting because I think people don't understand the voting system well. And I mean that on a really basic nuts and bolts level. People understand the generalities, but they don't get how votes are logged, how election officials go through these things and what the safeguards are in the system. And so I find it really helpful to talk through those things because it grounds a conversation in facts rather than in, allegations or ideas or hypotheticals about how the election might be, hacked by malign forces or whatever. You just talk about what actually goes on, and I think that's helpful. Sometimes what I get is a kind of when you say there's no evidence for these things, you get a sort of, well, the absence of evidence isn't evidence of absence, and I don't quite know how to answer that. I mean, it's an old concept, but I would just like to see if elections are unfair, I would like to see proof of that. And I wrote a story not long ago about these theories circulating broadly left of center about actually Kamala Harris won the election, and looking at claims that the 2024 election was tainted by fraud. And it's exactly the same sort of things you heard from people on the right in 2020, the same shape, the same questions, and ultimately the rebuttals are the same thing. And I just think it's so important to talk people through that and point out why the system, why our voting counting, for example, is safe, and also the things that aren't, and to do that in a straightforward way, no matter who's making the allegations.
Where are you most concerned in terms of gaps in the system?
I think what I'm concerned about is things like people getting access to voting machines who shouldn't be.
Yeah.
Third parties getting access to voting machines.
Yeah.
Because that's the sort of thing where then you can't trust. You might not be able to trust the count.
Yeah.
If there's no chain of custody. I'm worried about.
So, by the way, the guy who wrote the children's book about King Trump, is now running the FBI. So, seizing FBI machines is totally
right,
possible.
And that's something they talked about in 2020, and it was rejected, basically because some of the more sober minds in the first Trump administration were like, "You absolutely cannot do that." And I don't think we see the same sort of restraint from somebody like Kash Patel. Um, I worry about what goes on at the state level. We saw pleas for state governments to basically throw out the vote in 2020
Mm,
and declare winners. I think that's still something that is, a danger. The Supreme Court pushed back on a little bit of that in the independent state legislature theory, but there's still a worry there. Um,
I have
uh,
more confidence in the Supreme Court when it comes to this stuff than a lot of other folks, partly because of that ruling on that special case coming out of North Carolina. But there were
yeah,
other cases too. The one that came out of Pennsylvania, where some of us non-lawyers learned about the laches theory, the laches
yeah,
doctrine. But that was Alito's jurisdiction
uh-huh.
where it was dismissed unanimously. So I don't know. Even
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, when I was talking to Democratic lawyers for this story, I expected them to be really worried about the Supreme Court, and what I got was a lot of, listen, I don't like any of those SOBs, but I actually don't think there's a big problem here. The Supreme
hmm,
Court is their jurisprudence on elections has been really restrained. It's sensible, and also most of these cases don't even go to the Supreme Court. They go
right.
to district courts and appeals courts, and they end there, and those courts tend to do a pretty good job too. And I mean, we had this case in North Carolina in 2024 where a state Supreme Court election dragged on for months,
Yeah.
and it was a Trump-appointed Federalist Society member district court judge who finally ruled and said, "You can't do this. This is the end of the line," and ruled against the Republican candidate in that race.
Yeah, yeah. Now there is a term, changing gears a little bit, that I've heard. Oh, I heard it for the first time, I don't know, about 2 weeks ago. Now I've heard it just about every day. Competitive authoritarianism.
Yeah.
What is that, and where are we on the scale?
Yeah, I think it's a really helpful concept, and it's one that I have been thinking about. I mean, I learned about it, I think, earlier this year, and it's been guiding a lot of my thought. This is an idea. So there's Lucan Way and Stephen Levitsky, a couple political scientists, came up with this idea, I believe in the 90s or maybe the early 2000s, to describe what they saw in other countries. So, in the past, an authoritarian would grab power through a military coup or whatever, get rid of voting, close down all the, outlaw the opposition, close newspapers, you name it. And what they have pointed out is there's actually a way that modern authoritarians do this, which is different. They understand that voting is both popular and also gives you a sort of veneer of legitimacy. So they don't get rid of voting. They don't get rid of all the news outlets. They don't outlaw the opposition. What they do is they allow these things to stay, but they tilt the playing field. So the opposition might even win some elections, but generally the ruling party has an unfair playing field and they're going to win most of the time. And so this idea that was originally designed to describe, I think Turkey is a great example. Russia is maybe closer to authoritarianism proper, but that's a good example. You see these states in Latin America as well. And now these scholars and others see it happening in the U.S. So, concentrated media control, attempts to threaten the media,
Hmm.
um, prosecutions of Democrats, attempts to investigate Act Blue, the major Democratic fundraising platform. These things that none of these things are outlawing them. You're not saying Democrats can't run, but you just discourage participation. You discourage people from getting involved, and you make it harder for Democrats to win elections, and or whoever the opposition might be. So I don't know if we would describe the U.S. as a competitive authoritarian system now, but I think we see those characteristics popping up all over the place, and I think it's an important way to understand sort of where we are. Because I mean, I think people say, and I got a lot of this. Well, how can you see this isn't a dictatorship? We saw all these people out in the streets for no kings.
Right.
And I think, we need to update our idea of what a dictatorship looks like or what authoritarianism looks like. It doesn't look like it did at one time. And it may be that there are protests and also that there's not a meaningful way to challenge executive power. Those things can both be true.
Mm. Yeah, that it doesn't necessarily look like it did in the 1920s and 1930s, but patrimonialism is in full force,
Right.
as your colleague John Roush would put it. I want to talk about some fun stuff.
All
So
right.
you're really into music. What are you listening to music wise these days?
Let's see. So I've been listening a lot to a bunch of recordings by the jazz drummer Jack DeJohnette, who just died a
Oh,
few days ago.
when
Sort
did
of
you first get
delving.
into jazz? By the way, some of your pieces, man, on Coltrane and Monk. I can't get it. I hope that your next
Great.
book is just on jazz.
I would like that. I would like that too. I got into it I guess in middle school maybe.
Oh, wow.
My mom loaned me a book called Lush Life, which is a biography of Billy Strayhorn, who worked with Duke Ellington. And
Was he the
I just looked.
composer? Yeah.
Yeah,
His
exactly. That's the
collaborator?
guy. Yep, exactly. Great composer. And I didn't know anything about the music, and I just enjoyed the book, and then was like, well, I should listen to some of this. And then the Ken Burns jazz series came out, and then I was sort of hooked.
Yeah.
And then, the other thing, I listen to a lot of sort of Americana, alt country kind of stuff. So I was at a concert by a woman named S.G. Goodman Sunday night. And the opener was a band I love that's in Durham called Fust, another Americana band. So it tends to be either sort of twangy stuff with guitars or else jazz, or even better, things that meet in the middle.
Yeah. And you play, right?
I do play a little bit, not very seriously though.
What do you, piano or horn or?
I play guitar, and I'm trying to learn how to play pedal steel.
Oh, wow.
It's really hard.
Okay. Are you trying to do any Django or anything like that or?
Oh, that's beyond me. That's too much. But I'll play like some kind of Grant Green soul jazz kind of stuff. I love that stuff.
Oh man, I miss it. There's something that's missing. My soul has a vacuum right now because when we first moved out to California, we couldn't afford a full piano, and we couldn't afford a place that was big enough to for a
Right.
piano. So I got away from it, and every time I sit down, I just can't. It breaks my heart that my fingers don't remember the language. But
Yeah.
quick story.
You
So
can always come back to it.
I know. So this year, You know what I'm going to do? I'm just going to pick up. I'm just going to do scales.
Yeah.
Just remember the 145, like you were talking about. I'm just going to remember the blues scales. There are some progressions that a mentor of mine who just passed away about a month ago gave me. It's I forgot the composer's name off the top of my head, but it's a series of lessons that he gave his son. So I'm just going to go through those and pick it back up. But I was jazz curious, but you'll appreciate this. I don't mean to filibuster.
No, no, go ahead. I'm loving it.
I visited my buddy was going to Duke Divinity School in the early 2000s, and there was this incredible professor. He's at Indiana now, but he was there at the time. A guy named J. Cameron Carter, and we crashed. Every time I went, I would make sure to crash one of Jay's classes. So one time he was teaching he was combining two things: one thing from the Old Testament, combining it with a concept in the New Testament, the body of Christ. But he spent 45 minutes talking about Coltrane's Naima, like he was introducing
Oh
the
yeah.
topic with Naima. And it
That's
just really,
cool.
and so Coltrane, he was playing some recordings like the last year or two before Coltrane passed away about virtuosity, and it tied completely into that concept of being faithful to the score and playing with other virtuosos, but the freedom within
Yeah.
the movement of the composition. So I've been into jazz like full force ever since.
Oh, that's great. I love that.
So jazz and Duke, that all came together. But I always look forward to when you have a music piece. The Americana stuff too, man. Like, did you like that Bob Dylan movie that came out about a month or two ago?
Yeah, I did. I was slow to get to it, but I thought it was really interesting. I thought it was really well done. Um, was raised on a lot of Dylan, and so I have a pretty high tolerance for
Yeah.
anything Dylan. I don't know if you saw that movie I'm Not There that came out, God, maybe probably 15 years ago now. It had
I think
Kate Blanchett playing. It had all these actors playing Dylan, including Kate Blanchett and Ben Whishaw and all these different people.
I'll have to go back and check it out.
It's really bizarre. I mean, it's a
Okay.
weird movie. It's interesting to think about that and a more straight biopic and put them together. And I thought like thinking about them against each other also I found really helpful for sort of thinking about Dylan and the like. He's almost just a character more than he is a real person at this point, and sort of understanding like what role that character plays in American history and the American consciousness
Yeah.
is so cool.
So I saw it twice. First of all, it should be noted that I grew up going to Pete Seeger shows, and then when Pete and Arlo Guthrie were playing a lot together, I mean, literally not hundreds, but definitely dozens
Wow.
of shows. Because Pete used to do free concerts in the park in New York that my mother would bring me to. So I went to see the movie myself first, but then I brought my parents, and they're in their late 70s. They're from New York, and I don't know if you've ever had that pleasure of sitting in a movie with old Jews from New York. But they're like, I don't. Why would he like full voice through the whole movie? Why he didn't say that? That's Bleecker and McDougal. That's not what that looked like. The whole freaking movie. It was great.
That's great. I love that.
Yeah, Ronnie and Phyllis are a trip. But they lived it. Like my dad was going to Greenwich Village right when, like that very time period, 62,
Oh, cool.
63. He was just discovering that scene when Dylan was first arriving there. All right, so a couple of serious questions now. So this
Okay.
is the TP&R question. What do you think each of us can do to be able to share space with, have better conversations with, and perhaps even nurture relationships with people across our differences? So we're already talking about that in a way. That's people who have different backgrounds and beliefs than we do, who get their news from different sources than we do. How can we do better at talking politics and religion without killing each other, or is it even possible?
I have been thinking a lot over the last year about localism
Mm,
generally. Maybe even longer actually. Uh in during the pandemic, my family moved and then we moved back to Durham. And part of that was that we had realized the importance of the community we'd fostered here. Um, and I think thinking about those local connections is really important. And it's all I had been thinking, probably maybe a teaser for a piece coming about it. The way that, like, they say all politics is local. It feels like no politics is local right now.
yeah,
Everything gets so quickly, nationalized and put along party lines. And I think about, you look at these poll questions, and often the poll questions, people say there's an outrageous answer from one part of the other. But the problem is that when you look at these questions, so often the respondents understand what the question is really asking is, do you like Donald Trump or not? It's not really that people aren't expressing their opinions about the matter at hand. They know what the question is asking, and that's how they're answering it. And so I think talking about things in concrete, small ways, talking about values, talking about how, what's going on with people they know, what's going on with people in our community, grounds things in values, and it grounds things in real questions rather than these sort of abstract Washington food fight type questions.
yeah, yeah. What in terms of what you're reading, I would imagine you're reading pretty voraciously, long form and short form. What kind of stuff are you taking in?
I may be about the last person doing this, but I depend on RSS
Oh,
feeds. I started doing that when I started in journalism, and they'll have to pry my reader from my cold dead hands. And what I love about that is, compared to social media, I used to be a huge Twitter user, and people would use that to get news, but I would just find you miss so much. And I love an RSS feed because I can consume so many things from so many different sources. So I have a reader that is full of, I've got basic mainstream news sources on there: Washington Post, New York Times. I have conservative sources: Federalist, National Review. I have liberal things: Talking Points Memo. I get a bunch of Substacks, and I do think I just try to be paying attention to so many as many things as I can. And I tell people, like, it to some extent it doesn't matter what you're reading if you know how to read it.
yeah.
Um, I'm gonna learn. I want to know, what the I don't want to say bias. I want to know what the perspective is of the people I'm reading. And once I understand where they're coming from, I can learn a lot from that, no matter what it is. I just have to
Hmm.
be savvy about what I'm reading and not take everything at face value. And I think that's true for left-wing sources, centrist sources, moderate sources, middle of the road sources, and conservative sources. So that's a really vague answer on principle. What am I reading right now that I've been into? Um, I am reading. This is a weird one. I'm working on a book 2 years before the mast, which is a chronicle of sailing from Boston to California and back in the 20s, 30s.
Oh, wow.
Totally different sort of book, and I have been absolutely loving it. It's a mixture of these beautiful descriptions of the sea and life at sea, and then totally incomprehensible descriptions of the lines and sails on these sailing ships, where I'm totally lost.
So is it historical fiction or?
It was written at the time by a guy who was Harvard kid who got tired of school and decided to go to sea for 2 years, and then he was from a prominent Boston family, and then came back and wrote this book, which is I guess a bestseller at the time. He knew Emerson. He was sort of in that
Oh,
circle
wow.
through his family, and then went on to a career as a lawyer and also a writer after he came back.
My youngest kid's name is Emerson, because I love that period of writers.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I need to work. I need to work in some more fiction. But Wendell Berry, one of my favorite
Hmm.
living authors, just I hope it's not his last one in this series. There's this imaginary town in Kentucky that he basically writes from the voice of different characters, going from like mid to late 1800s in this imaginary town to the present day. So he just came out with a new book, but his poetry too is just incredible.
Yeah.
Do you have any questions for me?
So you talked about how working on writing a lot on Substack, and I'm wondering what you're learning from that practice. Because when I feel like doing this for long enough that it's easy to get in ruts. So I want to know from somebody who has not been doing it as long, what are you taking from that, and what has surprised you about it?
So it's an interesting exercise for me because I wrote for 15 years, but entirely privately.
Right.
I wrote because it was a practice that I needed to incorporate for my mental health. So her name is Julia. I want to say Julia Cameron wrote a book called The Artist's Way that I read about 20 years
Oh
ago.
yeah. Uh-huh.
And she advocates for she calls it the morning pages. So I took some bits of that and just developed this daily writing habit of really stream of consciousness, but talking. I believe I happen to believe in God, so I was talking to God because number one, I couldn't bullshit, right?
Mm-hmm.
I needed to. So that got me into the habit of just even if I didn't think there was anything there to put the pen on the paper and just start writing. And every morning there was something that came out, right? So it's a little different now because I realize that I'm writing publicly, even though my audience is, it's not the Atlantic's audience. It's just, it's still semi-private because I'm not a high-profile person, but people are reading it, and so in some
Mm-hmm.
cases, people that I'm just loose acquaintances with are reading it. But I try to do a few things. One is just the practice of putting my hands on the keyboard in this case,
Yeah.
and seeing where it goes. Sometimes it's different. I also used to write music, and some days you just have to like it's like taking a hammer to like the hardest steel and you just have to work through it, right? But then other times the song jumps out and it just 5 minutes you can write a beautiful piece of music. So it's the same thing with writing compositions. Sometimes it's really I have so much that I want to share and it's somewhat structured, but other times I just have to ramble a bit. And that's where, to your point, when I read it out loud, my wife thinks I'm crazy because I'm reading out loud by myself.
No, that's a great practice.
Yeah. But then I see, there is a through line here. And let's just get rid of this, this, and this. And here's where so it's been a really interesting exercise. But also, I think it's good that I've waited this long to do it because I have a particular, um, there's a particular, I don't want to say agenda, but like my thing is talking politics and religion without killing each other.
Mm-hmm.
Like we could talk about any number of issues, even the hardest issues, but really everything is filtered through how do we do this better? How do we
Mm-hmm.
talk to each other, our neighbors, our family, our loved ones, our, workmates, how do we do it? How can we do it better? Because we've lost it. We've let the crazies and the screamers and the extremists take over. So let's take some of that back and have these conversations. So I don't know if that answers your question directly,
Yeah.
but
I mean, let me ask a sort of semi-related question, but mostly tangential with connections. Um, like thinking about, I was, I joke that I'm Episcopalian, so obviously I don't like to talk about my faith publicly. We don't talk about that stuff. We just do it. We just go through lots of motions. But I think about like how to, uh, I see in a lot of the press, there are people who are not people of faith, and there are people who are people of faith but don't quite, aren't, I'd say we're not sure always how to articulate that in our work. And I'm not sure if I have a question, but I'm curious what you counsel in order that we can have those better conversations. How can we in the mainstream press or in major outlets talk better about religion, you think, to make those sort of civil conversations easier?
So
That's
the
really
first,
big. Sorry. Let me just put a really huge question on you.
um, there's an organization, and I'm going to get it wrong. You know what? I'm going to look it up just to make sure because it's a really great organization. I want to say Faith Angle Forum.
Oh yeah,
Um,
uh-huh.
so they, yeah, yeah, Joshua Good, I think is his name.
Mm-hmm.
So they do a really great job of having these discussions. And in fact, some of my favorite thinkers and writers, Will Salatan and a couple of the guys I mentioned before, E.J. Dionne and
Mm-hmm.
David Brooks and Pete Wehner,
Yeah.
are all part of it. Even atheists. He's a guy that I've become friends with, and it's such a cool thing to be able to say John Roush, who he's
Mm-hmm.
an atheist, but they participate in these conversations and ask that important question. For me, and I would love to, you know what? It's time. I should check in with Josh because I'd love to have this conversation on the air again and see what they've thought. But for me, the first phrase that comes to mind is by just being out of the closet believer,
Uh-huh.
whatever those beliefs are, because you know. Some of my favorite conversations are between guys like John Roush and Pete Wehner.
Yeah.
Those are just incredibly whatever wherever you lean, whether it's more skeptical or pure, orthodox atheist. But those conversations are just priceless, man.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I think I root for people like anybody who's part of the Episcopalian Church or the Anglican Church or what have you to be more open about what their beliefs are or even what their questions are because if we're not talking about it, we're ceding that
Right.
territory to the worst actors. You know, I don't want Matt Walsh to be the representative of people who happen to believe in God.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? So I don't know if that's a sufficient answer, but I would just say be out of the closet about it, man.
Yeah. That's interesting. Yeah, totally.
Um, I could do this forever. I was joking about going on for 7, 8 hours. I could probably do it just on jazz alone and what you're reading. So the project, how Project 2025 is reshaping America, and the new piece, it's really incredible deep dive. Donald Trump's plan to subvert the midterms is already underway. How can we follow you and make sure to keep up with all this great work, all the great work that you're doing?
I mean, I'd say that the best thing to do is subscribe to the Atlantic's daily newsletter, which is free. You'll get an essay from me 2, 3 times a week, and links to other great stuff. I am not really active on Twitter anymore. I'm on Blue Sky. I'm on Facebook for whatever that's worth. But probably just I think the newsletter is my best bet.
Yeah, yeah, it's good stuff, and I love that newsletter. The different folks who contribute, your pieces that come out. It's always thought provoking. I don't always agree with you, but I think that's kind of the point.
There was a great piece by Carlos Lozada in the New York Times several
Oh,
months ago,
yeah, yeah,
and
yeah,
it was something I can't remember what the number was, but he was basically like, I don't want anyone to agree with me 100% of the time. I want
yeah.
you know I want people to agree with me sometimes, but I want people to be I want to provoke thoughts. I want to help people think through something, even if they come to a different place than me. So I'm really glad to hear
Yeah,
that.
when it's a different shade, when it's a different perspective, sometimes I've already thought whatever the issue might be through well enough to realize, oh, we're coming at this from different perspectives. Like I forget if it was one of your pieces, but like Prop 50 here in California, I'm guessing we're probably on different sides of that. I'm almost asking somebody to convince me otherwise, but so far I haven't been moved. So I still have a few days, but that's kind of the point.
Oh, I don't know. I think I'm skeptical of Prop 52.
Are you?
Yeah,
Oh,
I mean,
that's
I
interesting.
think I think a nice thing about being in journalism is you don't have to be on a team.
Yeah.
And I think the arguments against gerrymandering and for independent redistricting and for taking these things out making them less political is really strong.
Yeah.
And I understand where Democrats are coming from on this. I understand the argument you need to fight fire with fire.
Yes.
But I'm not in the firefight. And I think that good governance is good governance, no matter what the time is.
That's the thing. And I'm almost inviting somebody to help me understand where where my thinking is amiss. But number one, the independent commissions are a good democratic renovation, as Danielle Allen would refer to it. And two is fighting fire with fire. My friend Liz Joyner with the Village Square would say, why don't we fight fire with water?
Hmm.
Or another way to think of it is, okay, so why don't we go to these districts, and if you don't make a case for the voters in those districts, however they're drawn. But the way the districts are being redrawn under Prop 50, I wouldn't be fairly represented. I would be
Hmm.
drawn out of my hometown. And nothing against the folks that are 50 miles away.
Right.
I'm sure they're lovely people, but they're not my neighbors. I want to vote along with my neighbors.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
all right, we covered a lot. Is there from jazz to books to Prop 50 to everything in between? Is there anything important we haven't discussed that you'd like to add before we wrap it up?
I don't know. This has been a great conversation. I
Oh
appreciate
man.
it.
Yeah, yeah. Thanks for doing this. It's such a thrill for me because like I say, I mean, I hope you gleaned that I've been reading your work for quite some time. So
I
this
did. I
is such
appreciate
a
that.
treat for
Yeah. Thank
me.
you so much.
Well, thanks again for doing this, David. It's great to get to know you, and I hope it's not the last time we do it.
Sounds great.
And as always, if you dig what we're doing here, remember to follow the show, write that review. And now you can watch these conversations on YouTube. It's youtube.com/@politicsandreligion. And like I said at the top, I'm at Corey S. Nathan, at Corey, S as in Sam, Nathan, at Corey S. Nathan on all the socials, as well as Substack. Now go talk some politics and religion with gentleness and respect, and have a great week.